So I'm calling this one pastoring in a post-COVID world, because I think that, um, from everything that I can see, pastors and churches are adjusting to what goes on during COVID, as well as we are going to adjust. Some people are adjusting quite well. Some people are not adjusting so well. And so I want us to talk about that, and about the future, because that's the thing that we have to face. And so here's some things that are unknown to us. We do not know how this thing will end. In other words, is it going to continue on? I read today that even after we get a vaccine, people are going to have to wear masks and do social distancing for up to as much as 2 years. Probably it will be a little bit easier for churches to meet together than it is now in person, but it's not going to be over as quickly as we might be thinking it will be over. And so we're having to adjust to that even once we get back together in our buildings, there's going to be change that we're going to face, and it's going to be a permanent change. We don't know how many people that we love and that we know are still going to be killed by COVID. We've gone through this horrible springtime, summertime. Everybody thought it would slow down during the summer and then hit again during the fall. Here in California, what happened was we had more people sick during the summer because everybody went to the beach and had parties. And so we can directly trace it that 10 to 14 days after a holiday, a lot more people are getting sick. And so that is a continuing problem for us. We don't know about the economy, and that is a really important thing, I think, for our churches. Churches like yours are better positioned than most churches in the United States because you already are smaller churches. You don't own property where you have a lot of money that you have to put out on mortgages and all of those kinds of things. One of the things that we do know coming out of COVID is that micro churches that are growing beyond micro and need a place, they need to rent an office space or some storefront or something like that. Because of COVID, there's going to be a lot, real estate is going to become cheaper coming out of COVID. And so one thing that we need to be thinking about is how do we take advantage of the possibility that there would be small real estate places available for us. So as we look about the future of pastoring coming out of COVID, we really just don't know what's going to happen, and we need to face that. Here's some things that we do know. We know that we are called to make disciples, and that in COVID, out of COVID, in persecution, out of persecution, we are always called to make disciples. And so that is the thing that we need to focus on the most. And we know this, that leaders are called to equip and to mobilize ordinary people. One of the things that we've seen happen during COVID is people, I was pastoring a large church in Hawaii 10 years ago. And in that church, there were some people who their job in church was to direct traffic in the parking lot. Well, once COVID hit, they ended up becoming a mini church pastor. Mini church is like a micro church inside of a church. And so we know that that COVID has actually done some good things because people are learning to lead, because the church has had to break itself down into smaller groups of people. And again, what I think you folks are doing in the UK and in Russia, perhaps more in the UK than Russia. I know that Russia, the model is still built around a larger church. In the UK, you tend to be thinking more in terms of micro churches already. Here's another thing that we know, that we face some wonderful opportunities to multiply the church in the days to come. I can say that for several reasons. One is what we've just been talking about, that COVID has forced people to raise up more leadership. COVID has forced people to meet in smaller groups together. COVID has, you folks have used Zoom quite well, and that's been a really wonderful thing. But we know that whenever things get really difficult for the church, whether it's been persecution, whether it's an economic catastrophe, whether it's the tsunami in Japan, that churches tend to multiply during those times. And so we know that the future actually looks pretty good for all of us. We also know that the path is unclear. That we know there are things that we don't know, but we do know that there's a fork in the road, that there are going to be some churches that fail because they fail to adjust to COVID, and other churches are going to thrive because they have learned to adjust to COVID, and they will adjust well to the world after COVID. So here's what is not going to happen. We are not going to return to our buildings a little bit bruised by COVID, but everything gets back to normal. In fact, you need to look at the year 2019 and what your church looked like in 2019 and convince yourself that will never happen again exactly like that. Now, if you're meeting in a house prior to 2019, or you're meeting in a coffee shop, and probably yes, you will go back to what you would call normal. But if you've been meeting in a church building up until COVID, things are definitely going to be different. Here's another thing that's not going to happen, and that is everyone returns to church. In America, we are experiencing about, they say 31% of people who were attending church before COVID stopped attending after COVID. Some of them, when churches went online, because in America, they're using Facebook Live and YouTube and pre-recording. Most churches that did that, that quickly did that, their attendance skyrocketed. It got huge. Like one of my friends that you know, Myron Pierce, his attendance went from 300 people a week to 5,000 people a week around the world. It shrank, his shrank back to 2,500. That's very good. A friend of mine named Mike Kai in Hawaii was pastoring about 7,000 people. Their attendance shot up to 60,000 people, but then it shrank to about 25,000 people. But here's what we know. Most churches in America that did go online quickly had the boost in attendance, but then they shrank back to smaller than they were before COVID. And what they're saying is that in evangelical churches in the United States, 31% of the people who were going to church at least a couple times a month before COVID just don't go to church at all. They don't watch anything online. They don't have anything to do with anything. Here's another thing that we're experiencing is that there's competition in America for who can do the best online pre-recorded service. And so a lot of small churches are losing membership to a lot of large churches who have the capacity to do, to put on a good show, honestly. And so I think it's really important that you folks are not trying to put on a good show, that you're trying to be relational, because the church is relational. I think that we need to always look to Acts chapter 2, to the last 7 verses of the chapter, to figure out what are we supposed to be doing in church. And one of the things we're supposed to do is fellowship. And you cannot do fellowship with a pre-recorded sermon. You can only do fellowship in this online environment with something like Zoom. Or I've discovered some things when we start talking about microchurch. I've discovered some tools to help you to link people together in closer fellowship, we're reading the Bible together and talking with each other about it, and to make it easier actually to plan a microchurch. But we'll do that tomorrow. One of the things that is not going to happen is that no pastors will resign. We're finding in America already about 10% of pastors that were pastoring before COVID have resigned already. And here's another thing that's not going to happen. All of our marriages survive the depression, the alcohol, and the anger. Those 3 issues are huge during COVID. There is depression. People are experiencing, mental anguish and anxiety and depression. People are turning to alcohol. I invest in the stock market. I've been noticing the beer companies, their stock is going up real fast because of COVID. We know that Amazon stock is going up because of COVID. My wife and I now can buy our groceries from Walmart and have them delivered to our house. So we order our groceries online. We know that after COVID is over, the world is going to be a different world. One of my doctors told me that I'm old. I'm 74 years old. And in America, you pay for your own medical insurance. But then when you get old enough, you come under government medical insurance called Medicare. And I see a doctor, a Medicare doctor, because I have a hard time sleeping. And so he gives me medicine to sleep. That kind of a doctor, before COVID, if he was to meet with me on a telephone or meet with me over the internet or meet with me by email, the government would fine him $10,000 for every time he met with an individual over the internet. He cannot do online medicine. As soon as COVID hit, the government completely reversed and said, you must treat your patients online. You must talk to them on the telephone. You must do Zoom calls. So I meet with this doctor on Zoom. I have about 5 doctors. 3 of those doctors I met with during COVID in an online situation. Here's what that one doctor said to me. He said, Ralph, do you believe that after COVID, that we're going to go back to only meeting in doctor's offices? He goes, this is here to stay. And so it's going to change my world. He's talking as a doctor. He goes, I'm going to be able to share my office with another doctor. And each of us will be in the office 2 days a week. He'll have Monday, Tuesday. I'll have Wednesday, Thursday, and we'll both have Friday off. But the other 2 days we're going to do from home. So it's going to cut the cost of my business for me to do this online. Now, I have noticed where I live, there's a medical office building that I go to. It's 5 stories high. It's a very large building, lots of doctors. They have just announced that they're closing that building permanently. And in fact, there are 3 similar buildings in San Diego County that are medical office buildings that are being closed because doctors' offices are coming together. I just built, I took a closet in our house and made it into a pantry for my wife to store extra food in because we can't imagine that we're going to go back to the grocery store twice a week to buy groceries after COVID. We will continue to buy our groceries online after COVID and have them delivered in large amounts because it's cheaper that way. So COVID is changing the world, and it's certainly going to change when everybody is used to doing almost everything in their life online. You know, I never did internet banking before. Now I do internet banking. I do very much of everything in my life I do on the internet. Well, our people are used to doing that. And so they're going to be learning to do church online as well. And something we'll talk about a little bit later, but I want you to really be thinking about this. The youngest people in your church are the experts at doing things online. They know more about social media. They know more about how the internet works. They know about things that I have never even discovered. And those are the people that we need to be thinking of, that we bring into our teams and teach us how to do church online. Because, you know, some of us actually are like old dinosaurs, and we need to learn from the young people in these things. Here's another thing that's not going to happen. Offerings return to normal. Because a number of people aren't coming to church, it's just not going to be that way. The churches that are doing well financially have figured out now how to use online giving platforms, and people are giving online. However, I believe when we come back together in the building, we still need to pass the offering plate because it gives us a chance to talk about tithing and offering. That doesn't work really well when you talk about it so much online. You can talk about it online. You must talk about it online. But when you meet in a church building, it just seems more comfortable that way. And here's what's not going to happen. We're not going to just go back to church as it was and then have it going out live on Facebook. That's what my church was doing before COVID. That's pretty much what I was doing back in Kaneohe in 2002. There was no Facebook, but we had figured out how to put our church service on the internet live. While I was preaching, it was going out live, and there were no chat rooms, there was no Facebook, there was none of that, and so we had to have a person sitting in a room who would answer email, and that would be like a chat room. He was the internet pastor, and we did the service that way. And so now it's a lot easier to do something like that with Facebook. And so a lot of pastors in America are thinking, we'll go back in the building, everything will be the same, except for one exception. We'll hold a camera up there and it'll go out on the internet, and that will be us. That is not going to really satisfy a lot of people. Again, if you're doing that, then you're in competition with those great big churches that can do that better than you can. So after COVID, here's some things that are going to happen. Some churches are going to have small groups that never had small groups before. That's because COVID has kind of forced the church to do small groups, which is a very healthy thing, because we're going to see our churches have a lot more of what I call mini church, a micro church inside of a church. We're going to see a lot more of those. And we know that those become the leadership training ground for future pastors, and the church will be stronger. Here's something else that will happen after COVID. Many churches are going to close due to financial problems, and more pastors will quit. Once everybody kind of gets the sense of, oh, it's over, we can go back to normal, then they're going to have to face the financial problems that they really have that they may have put off during COVID. Some churches are doing better during COVID than they will when they get back in the building, because once they get back in the building, they'll focus on the building again. Or during COVID, they've had to focus on people and leadership and disciple making. And once they get back in the building will take up their attention, and that's going to hurt the church in many ways. Another thing that's going to happen that I think is very good is that many pastors are going to do what many of you folks do, and that's take secular jobs. In America, we have come through a time, I remember when I was a young man and I was starting out, the church had no money, there were no people. That first Sunday we had 12 people. One of them was my 6-month-old son. 2 of them were my wife and I, so we had 9 people besides us. A couple of them were high school students. There was no money. And so we had been saving money all our life. We both worked full-time jobs while we went to college. And we had saved, and we had enough money to make a down payment to buy a house. Well, we spent all of our money on the church in about 2.5 months, to the point that one day we closed our saving account, put everything in our checking account, paid the bills, and we had enough money that we could buy our children ice cream cones, but we couldn't buy them for ourselves. And I was desperate. I thought that it was over. And the world I came up in the Foursquare denomination, you had to go to a Bible college to be a pastor. And if you weren't a full-time pastor, you weren't a real pastor. In other words, if you had a secular job, people looked down on you. They thought you were a loser. And so I remember laying on a bed, feeling very, very bad and discouraged, and felt like the Lord had let me down. I'd made huge sacrifice, put all of my life savings into the church, and God had failed me. And so my plan was I was going to move 1,000 miles with my family to my father's basement under his house, and I would get a job selling used cars, because as a person who had gone to a Bible college, all I knew how to do was talk to people. And so I thought, well, I could start out by selling cars. Maybe later on I could sell real estate. I'm going to quit the ministry. Well, the world has changed. And where even 5 years ago in America, if you were what we call bivocational, or what I will call a freelance pastor, a bivocational pastor is in America is somebody who has a job. They have to have not a very good job just to help their church, because their church doesn't have enough money. A freelance pastor is a person who has a career. They have a job, they like their job pays well, they don't want to quit their job. So they keep their job for 40 hours a week and they pastor part-time. And this works really well with micro churches. And what we're going to see happen after COVID is a lot of churches will have shrunken to where they maybe become like large micro churches. The pastors will get a secular job. And so pastors who have been not paid very well by the church are suddenly going to have a job that pays them pretty well. It's going to take financial pressure off the church. But here's another added benefit. If a pastor works a secular job outside the church, they're going to be better connected to non-believing people. And that's going to make you a better pastor. If you are working with people who don't know the Lord, you know how they think. And you're better off in terms of evangelism, in terms of your preaching. Everything is better. And so I think the future, particularly in America, where we're seeing this election, and if Donald Trump gets reelected, he has done things to protect the church. If the other side gets reelected, well, they've blamed us for electing Donald Trump. So it's going to get harder for the church. So all the more that we're going to need to be in the world, knowing people in the world, knowing how to communicate with them if we want to evangelize them. And so another thing is after COVID, some churches are going, I talked about this before, are going to shrink because their pastor can't compete with the big churches that are going to grow. Another thing that will happen is that online churches, now think about this, online church that has a building is going to replace building churches that have a Facebook Live. So a couple of my really close friends have decided that when COVID is over, however it all changes, we are not going to be a building-centered church. We're going to be an internet-centered church. And many of you, 1 year ago, a little over a year ago, met my friend Myron Pierce. And if you're taking notes, please write this down. Two websites. One is myronpierce.com. 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 And then the other website, it's also Myron's website, it's his church, is thisismission.org. ThisIsmission.org. myronpierce.com, thisismission.org. So This Is Mission, you can go and watch his church. myronpierce.com, he's written some books about how to do DigiChurch, how to do online church. He's brilliant. Myron is my disciple. Myron is one of the smartest people that I know. The interesting thing is that Myron, who is exactly half my age, he is my son in the faith. I am his spiritual father. He calls me that publicly. He is an African American. I'm a white American, but we are tight. And he is teaching me so much about how to do church online. And he is planting what he calls digi-churches. Now, here's what Myron has done. Myron pastors in a very, very difficult neighborhood in Omaha, Nebraska. In fact, it's the most, and now Chicago is more dangerous. But before that, Omaha, Nebraska was the most dangerous place for an African-American man to live because of the crime and the drugs that are there. Myron, who you met, spent 8 years in prison for dealing drugs, but he also had attempted murder. And in prison, he found Jesus. In prison, he learned to be a pastor. When he got out of prison, some white guy discipled him to become a church planter. I've discipled him to be a church multiplier. And when COVID hit, Myron says, oh, this is incredible. This is opportunity for us. So Myron owns a social media marketing business. Myron is a freelance pastor of 300 people. Myron has started 4 businesses. He owns a roofing business. He owns a social media marketing business. He's a very successful ex-drug dealer, former convict. And God is blessing him amazingly. But Myron will spend between 100 and 300 US dollars, not very much money, starting a church in another city during COVID. And here's what he does. He uses Facebook, a Facebook page. You need to read his book to really understand this. But he uses a Facebook page, and he gets everybody in the church to go on Facebook and say they like that page, which gives him the ability then to run a small ad that is an ad to come and watch our church service. And that ad goes to all of the people who like the page and all of their friends. So naturally now you're networking people to their own friends. I got this ad about your church. He puts a lot of pictures of his own people up there. He has started what he calls digi churches in several in Omaha, several in other cities in Nebraska, in St. Louis in America, in Chicago in America, in New Jersey in America, in Harare, Zimbabwe, in Kampala, Uganda, and in Brixton, London. And what he does is he gets people to watch him on Sunday, and then he says, if you're interested in meeting with me, would you send me your email address? So then he meets with them. He organizes them in the city where they live into Zoom microchurches. And then he finds who's a leader already, a natural leader in that group. Maybe they're just a brand new Christian. But then Myron meets with them every 2 weeks and disciples them. And so he's been able to start churches in these areas. Now, I told you his church went from 300 people to 5,000 people, and then it shrank back to 2,500. It's 2,500 around the world. And he's not trying to get everybody to watch Myron on Sundays. What his long-term goal is to multiply the church. So we start out by come watch me on Sundays. I'll help you join together in where you live with other people where you live. And then I'll raise up a leader, and then that leader is going to become your pastor when we come out of this thing. It's brilliant. Now, here's something I failed to tell you. When you run an ad on Facebook, you can say, everybody who's friends of the people who like my Facebook page, everybody who's a friend of people who like my Facebook page who live in this small area. In other words, one day on a Tuesday, I get a phone call from Myron. When we were there last year, if you remember right, Myron got confused about the airlines and he got lost. He gets into Heathrow. He thought he could fly from Omaha to London in about 6 hours. Well, actually, he had to go sit in Denver, Colorado for 6 hours and then fly to London. So he missed a whole day of our time together. And then he got out of the airport in the middle of the night. He thought he could figure out the train system, the tube in London. And so he jumps on a train, and we're someplace north of London. I don't even know where we were, but he ended up in Brixton. Now, how we know it was Brixton is it was the end of the line where he got off the end of a train line, and he got out and he goes, hey, this neighborhood looks like my neighborhood at home. I feel comfortable here. And then he hired, because he's got a lot of money, he hired Uber, and they drove him all the way to wherever we were. So that was like a year ago. So about 4 months ago, it's a Tuesday morning, the night before, because when Myron came to London, Ruby and I had to stay to go to Ireland with Sareka. And Myron couldn't go to Ireland, but he could stay a few days. And so we wanted to show him London. He'd never been really out of the United States other than I took him to Japan one time. And so we had gotten on one of those tour buses in London. And so on a Monday night, I found this tour bus map in amongst my socks in my drawer. And so I just put it on the dresser. The next morning, I get a call from Myron. He calls me 2 or 3 times a week. I call him 2 or 3 times a week. He goes, Ralph, where was I in London? I go, I don't know. We did this conference. He goes, no. When I got lost, where did I get lost? Because wherever that town is, Jesus wants me to start a church in that town. And I go, what are you talking about? And he said, I was praying this morning and Jesus told me I'm supposed to start a church in that town. And all I know is it started with a B and it's where I got lost. So I happen to have the rail map. And so I get the map out and we start looking. The only town we can find south of the river where the train line ends is Brixton. As soon as I said the name, he goes, that's the place. And while I was there with Sareka, I met a guy from Brixton. I'm starting a church in Brixton. And so he's pulled together a bunch of people in Brixton because he could run a Facebook ad that would only show in Brixton. It wouldn't show to any of the rest of you. It would only show to people who are living in Brixton. And then he could draw them, come to my church on Sunday on the internet. And then if you want to talk to me, here's my email. And now I'm going to organize you. And they started a church in Brixton, a micro church, led by a guy with a secular job. And I asked Myron later on, how much money did it cost you to start a church in Brixton? And he said, oh, that's easy, $100. I only spent $100. And here's the last part that I'll tell you about this. Myron called me on a Tuesday, the first Sunday that church in Brixton met online with Myron was 5 days after he called me. That following Sunday, he already had a group of people. So you need to follow up on Myron Pierce because he has an awful lot to say. Now, here's what Myron's talking about now that they've been able to go back into the building for a while now. And so they changed the building, no more rows. Everything is going to be around tables so that they can handle less people in the auditorium. They sit at tables. They're going to do more services. He talks to the people and they can, and then he does like I do when I do a seminar. He'll talk for about 10 minutes and then they have Q&A. And then he talks for 10 minutes and they have Q&A. He also is going online to do this with Zoom, where we talk and we have Q&A. We talk and we have Q&A. He's refocusing everything around the internet is the main thing. The online, we are an online church that also happens to have a building because there's 300 people that meet in the building. There's 2,200 people online. So here's what you have to be thinking about if you're going to do this. You need to be thinking about, where do we spend our money? Do we spend all of our money supporting a building, or do we spend our money getting better at doing what we have to do online? Do our staff spend their time only with the people in the physical church in the neighborhood, or do our staff spend their time ministering to people online? Our staff job descriptions, are they all about what we do in the church, or do the staff job descriptions now start to deal with, well, you're the social media pastor, you're the person who, you start to do all of these things. My other friend, Mike Kai, has made the same decision. They actually had a huge piece of land almost near the city center where they live. They had just bought the land. The architect was drawing plans for a building and COVID hit. Mike immediately went online and started doing church online. Now, Mike Kai's church, it's called Inspire Church Hawaii. If you're writing notes, you might want to go on their website. I think it's called inspirechurch.live or inspire.church. But if you just Googled Inspire Church Hawaii, you would see it. Now, if you look too long at their website, you'll be discouraged because it's a big church with a lot of money and he's competing with others by putting on the big show. But So I don't want you to watch him and try to, if you're going to learn how to do something, learn from Myron. But there's a couple things that Mike can teach you, but do not try to imitate Mike, because if you do, you're competing with the Mike Kais of this world, and they're just too rich. You can't compete with them. We need to be back doing church on Zoom, plus doing church in a building like Myron's going to do. But here's what Mike told me. He said, I went to my staff and I told them, I'm changing your job description. And so he actually had done a bunch of research. He reads Myron's stuff, and he began to say, your job now is going to be, you used to do this in the church building. You'll do that with 20% of your time. 80% of your time is this new thing that you do online. And he said, you know what? Some people quit my staff over that. But that was really good, because then I could hire more people who were better at doing the online thing. And what he said there is that meant that I started looking to hire 16, 17, 18-year-old kids to replace 27-year-old staff members, because these kids can help me. Now, see, he's not entrusting the whole church to a 17-year-old. What he's saying is the 17-year-old can help the 40-year-old communicate better to people who are out there. And as soon as we do that, we're going to start reaching younger people anyway. So, so number 5 here is online churches with a building. So the churches online, it has a building, are going to replace churches with a building that do something online. And then one thing that also is going to happen after COVID is that some congregations that never did it before are going to plant microchurches, because during COVID, they've learned to spread leadership around. So here's 7 fruitful possibilities, and then we'll take a break and you do Q&A or however you want to do it. So we want to be thinking about what I just talked about so much, online church that has a physical campus. We want to be thinking about volunteer and paid staff teams being built around social media and online services. We want our worship to be shorter online. I was attending a church before COVID. When they went online, they started pre-recording. The pastor got a teleprompter. He was reading the sermon. I hated that. The worship guy went on longer than the pastor, and it was a solo. He was singing. With Zoom, we could all sing together. We'd sing poorly, but we could all be together in it. The worship service online needs to be shorter, particularly if it's something where other people are watching. There needs to be online and in-person discipleship groups. You need to do both. We need to have live Zoom preaching and worship, which you guys are already doing. If you go online and you do it well, coming out of COVID, you, much like Myron, can go from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth. You can go from the UK to mainland Europe, to Nepal, or to Australia, or to New Guinea. You can go to any of these places where small churches would only be able to do missions by giving other people money. Now you can do missions by learning to use social media to reach people in other locations. Very exciting possibilities are out there. The churches that Myron has started in Africa are now churches of like 400 or 500 people. And you're doing this from where Myron lives. Myron is a wealthy person because he owns so many businesses. The church is very, very poor. I was there. It is poor people. It's a dangerous neighborhood. He could show me place after place where people had been murdered in the streets in that neighborhood. And these people are doing missionary work around the world, and they're doing it better than, and I'm going to say this, and I'm not just saying this because he's my friend. I'm not just saying this to say this. I'm saying this that right now, and I know a lot of people because I work with Exponential. I work with a lot of pastors. Nobody in the world that I know is doing missions overseas as well or as efficient as Myron Pierce. And what he's doing, you can do. And I think it's going to be a really wonderful thing. And the last possibility is that our churches are going to reach younger people in ways that we can't yet imagine. And the reason for that is if you want to survive, you're going to have to do it online, and you're going to have to get younger people in the act, because I don't understand the internet. I don't understand social media marketing. Myron teaches me, but I don't understand what he understands. But you know what? I don't understand what my 19-year-old grandson understands. He knows it way better than me. So it's gonna force us to reach younger people. One of the struggles that we have with our churches is we get old, we get set with our music, we get set in our ways. Us older people don't like the music of those younger people, and pretty soon our churches are only for old people. And so we're gonna need to be thinking about that. And so I want to hand it back over to Sarika, and we'll do whatever you want.
Thanks, Ralph, for that first great opening. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask at this time? What is the name of the ministry? I have put the two website addresses, myronps.com, and this is Mission. Go ahead, Julia.
Hi, everyone. Hi. I have a question about how, like, do we have any information as to how online churches have impacted the rate of new Christians, of newly, you know, people that have discovered Jesus with online services? Because a part of me, you know, like I always want to invite friends to services, and I've sent links, but I'm also really curious as to how does, like, they're just in their bedroom watching people worshiping. It's not the same as when we invite them into church and everyone's, you know, in one spirit together in the room. So do we have any idea how it's going to impact that like new Christian, you know, growth?
So I have a question for you that will help me answer your question. The church that you are part of, is it a Zoom live church or is it a Facebook church?
We did Facebook for a while, and now we've done Zoom.
Okay, so if you do Zoom, you first is, see, I think there's a problem. We always think in America, we bring people to church and then they find the Lord. Really, we need to be bringing people to know the Lord. I think one of the problems that we have is called an altar call. You know, I'm not against altar calls. I've always done them. But really, there's no altar call in the Bible. In the Bible, it says, follow me as I follow Christ. So as you are interacting with your friend, over time, that friend is going to want to be like you. You know, Myron, my friend Myron, does a thing about, no, I have another friend, another African-American friend, that said that for a little while he got in some trouble and he had to go to a different high school. And he said he immediately wanted to be like the successful people there. So your friend is going to want to be like you, so that connection between you and that friend is the most important connection. The second most important connection is the connection to the church. And if the church in COVID is doing it through Zoom, then there's a possibility of a real connection. And I think then the next step from there is that you come into like a midweek micro church that's part of your church, and that you bring your friend into that. And maybe it's just that you and your friend start meeting on a Zoom call during the middle of the week. Zoom is free if you do it for less than 40 minutes. So you can do that. Now, there is a group, if you want to write this down, called I think Barna, BARNA.org. I'll look up the website a little bit later, so I'm sure, but that they are putting out a lot of statistics about these things. And what they're finding is in America, because of the pre-recorded nature of most churches, that it's becoming very, very difficult to have any kind of an answer for the question that you ask. They don't have answers for themselves, those churches. because they're just, so much of American church for the last 40 years has been come watch the show. And so now that they're online, it's come watch the show. They don't know what to do. I'm working with a church in Denver, Colorado, and their numbers are way up, and they've actually been baptizing people. And they're a church of about 500, and they went to 2,000, and then they came back down to about 1,000. So 500 more people than before, but they don't know these people. And one of the questions that we asked, they pay me money to coach them. And so I was with them earlier in the week, and they're going, Ralph, how do we get these people to give us their email address? And so well, here's what we came up with. We said the pastor of this big church, 500, now 1,000 people, should say, I'm doing a special service for people who are new in the church. If you send me your email address, I'll send you the link to the special service. Now, they're doing the Facebook service, the pre-recorded service. He's going to do so what we came up with is you do a Zoom live service, but they got to send an email address to get the link to the service. Now he's got their email address. Now he can follow up with them. The thing that begins to be an ability to answer the question you're asking, because right now, basically, no one can answer that question in America. The guys like Myron can, but the guys that are doing the big show, there is no answer. And so what we really do believe, we know that about 70%, before COVID, about 70% of Americans are just not interested in church at all. They think it's, maybe it was a social phenomenon that had a purpose before, but it's useless now. And so we're in America, we're kind of, I think in America, we're beginning to look like maybe the UK did in about 1960, where people turned their back on God. That's kind of where we're at. And so only people who have any kind of an answer to the question you're asking are the people who are doing it, where they have some kind of face-to-face contact. So you ask a short question, I give a long answer.
Anyone else who has a question for Ralph, from the section that he just shared with us?
Could I ask something?
Go ahead, Anne.
How will it affect tithes and offerings? Do you know what happens if people want to give somebody online?
People, there are online giving platforms, and so many churches are here. How do I say this? The churches that are reaching out to, so think about this. We're doing an online church. B, it's better if we do it by Zoom. And C, it's also better if we're doing things to help people outside the church. So the churches that are helping people outside the church, one of my friends is in North Carolina, African-American church, church of about 120 people, quite small. I began coaching him. He had pastored a church of about 80 people. They merged with another church, and the merger didn't go well. He said some people that were white didn't like me because I was Black. Some people in our church who are Black didn't like those white people, so they left. So the church had grown from about 80 to 160 in the merger. It shrank down to about 120, and it stabilized. Then COVID hit. So immediately they went online. I don't know if they're doing Zoom or not, but also he began to see needs in the community around him. And it started out this way. It's kind of a interesting thing, what I'm going to tell you. He began, in America, they make a big thing about the medical people are heroes, because a lot of doctors and nurses have now died of COVID because they were treating sick people with COVID. And so they're calling them frontline workers. And so frontline people would be medical people, would be policemen, whatever. Well, he said he began to realize that the people that work at McDonald's are frontline workers, because they're interacting with the public every day, all day. And in America also, one of the things that we've noticed in the stock market is the auto parts stores, that sell replacement parts for old cars, are doing a really good business because many of the automotive shops shut down, so people would work on their own cars, so they go to the auto parts store. So my friend went out and bought a bunch of donuts, and he went to McDonald's, and he said, when I got to McDonald's, I thought, oh my gosh, they only do drive-through. So maybe will I have to go to the drive-through window and try to give them donuts? Will they not take the donuts? He said when he got there, there were people standing outside the front door of McDonald's on a cigarette break. And so there were employees. So he said, I just walked up to, I had a mask. I walked up to them and I said, I think you guys are frontline workers and I just wanted to do something nice for you. And he gave them a box of 24 donuts to share inside the restaurant. He said this one lady just broke out crying, just, nobody cares about us. Everybody treats us bad. They yell at us. You're the first person that's shown us any kindness. And they asked him who he was. And here's what happened. He told them who he was. He told them that he's a pastor. His church is actually, you can see his church from that McDonald's. And he goes, I'm the pastor of that church. 2 people from that McDonald's joined his online church services because he gave them donuts.
Wow.
He said he went to 2 different auto parts stores and left donuts for them. And he said in one of those, the manager, big burly guy, tears came in his eyes. And he goes, man, it's like people forgot us. They come and they buy stuff, but we're in this every day. So from that, somehow, they begin to realize that there are children, and again, this is a poor neighborhood, that their parents are on drugs. So they don't get a good meal every day. And so the schools give them a good lunch. And the only good food those children are getting is at school, but now school isn't meeting. So the church went out, and this church doesn't have a lot of money, but they begin to feed 400 children every day. Somebody heard about it and said, we'll give you food for free if you can find a place to store it, a cold storage. So they had what they did is they bought a big truck with a refrigerator in it. I donated, I have a thing that helps me raise money to travel to come to you guys. And we put $5,000 into them buying that truck. Well, other people now have heard of what they're doing in the community, and their online giving has more than doubled. So we're seeing, and I could tell you about maybe 8 or 10 stories of this. So here's what we're finding is people are suspicious of churches. Our costs should have come down because we're doing it just online. But if we take that money and we do something good with it and we talk about it, then people are giving. And what we're even finding is that non-Christians are giving money to churches that are doing something online. The 2 things that I think you need are, in addition to having a good online Zoomy kind of an online thing, are that you're doing something outside and that there's a way to give online, that people don't have to mail you a check. And so I'm sure you guys have something in England that allows for online giving. If you don't, I can help you find something.
Thank you.
That's interesting what you said, Raz, that it's not just meeting kind of on a Zoom context, but also doing something into your community. And kind of, because that then becomes your outreach, that then becomes you're connected to the community. Because
yeah. My wife, when we lived in Hawaii, people have those Hawaiian flower shirts that everybody wears in Hawaii. And so she wanted to make a quilt for a bed with that Hawaiian print materials. And so she went to a swap meet, and the companies that make the shirts, when they cut the material out, they have odd shaped pieces of fabric left over. And so she could buy a whole bundle of all these different kind of colors of shirt materials that were cut real funny shapes for like $10. So she had big boxes of this material, and she always was going to make a quilt. Well, she started making face masks, COVID masks, out of Hawaiian print material. And one of the patterns of the shirt had like beer mugs on it. And so she made some face masks with beer mugs. And we have a company called UPS, United Parcel, and it's a place where they do shipping of packages. And they have little stores. And because I travel so much, we get our mail delivered there. So if I get a large package, they hold it for me. So one day I went to the UPS store and I was angry because the people inside, two of them were wearing masks. One young girl wasn't wearing a mask. And the government had said, you have to have a mask. So I came home complaining to my wife that stupid girl is not wearing a mask. And Ruby goes, well, maybe she doesn't have a mask. I'm going to take her some of the masks I'm making, because she was just making masks to give away in our church. And see, this is our problem. We only want to do everything in our church. So she starts thinking, oh, maybe they don't, at the UPS store, they don't have any masks. So I'll go take some masks to the UPS store. So she did. And everybody liked them, and they started wearing them a lot. And so then she went back there. The guy that owns the store, his wife is a Christian. He is not. So she went and made a mask with that shirt material that had a beer mug on it. And she gave this non-Christian guy his mask with this thing. Well, he doesn't wear it. He carries it and he shows it to everybody. And he brags about, this lady, this pastor's wife, made me this mask with a beer mug on it. And so we're learning to do things for people outside of our church in our neighborhood. And so then what we did, and this isn't a church thing, this is just us. We went in our up and down our street to our neighbors, and every house, we made a little plastic bag. We wore our masks. We made a little plastic bag that had like 5 masks that she made in it. And we went to each neighbor, and we'd ring the doorbell and stand at a distance so they wouldn't be afraid of us, and then go, we made this for you, would you like this? And some of them are wearing them. Others, we were with our next door neighbor, they don't wear them, but they had somebody over at their house, and we were in the yard and we were all talking, and the lady goes, oh, I have to show you what Ruby made me. And she runs in the house and she brings the mask out. She's wearing one she bought, but she's showing off the one that Ruby gave her. And so we're just learning little ways of showing love really are productive. And I think it's something that we as a church have forgotten. We've learned how to run church services. We've forgotten, and we've learned how to kind of evangelize people by preaching at them. We've forgotten the acts of kindness that will help do that.
Wow, that's so good, because again, it's like, we don't wait till the church does it, but we are the church out there. And, individually, if we can begin to inspire our congregations to do that, it's phenomenal, and being creative as well. What Ruby did. And it's just those small little things like, the donuts or whatever, but it's that each individual doing that and then kind of pointing and saying, hey, do you want to be a part of, we meet on a Sunday or Monday or whatever, and pointing it towards the church. That's so good. Ralph, do you need a break or?
Yeah, I'd like to take a break. Can we take a break for maybe 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure. We can do that.
So you tell me what time to come back.